All right, welcome everyone. We'll get started in just a minute or two. I'm just seeing a few more people getting logged in here, so we'll start this in just a minute. All right. Well, I think that might be it for right now. So let's go ahead and just get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and get rolling. A couple of logistics to start. I will send you a link to a recording of this presentation, so no need to take intense notes. Also, if you have any questions, please chat them into the box below this presentation, and I will address them and actually address as many as I'm able to at the end. If I don't get to your specific question, not to worry. Someone from my team or I will personally follow up with you to make sure your question gets answered. So, okay, hello again, everybody. Thanks for tuning into this webinar. I've got the great pleasure to be talking with you about how you can make a series of really small, easy fixes to your website that will, when you add them up, make it much more effective for your business. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, well, let's start off by answering the why. Why should your business bother with its website? Well, I want to address this question for a few reasons. First and foremost, small businesses are notorious for having a set it and forget it approach to their website. And that's regrettable, but it's also understandable because most SMBs are small, busy, strapped for cash, and the website gets pushed to the bottom of their priorities. The second reason I'd like to address the why bother question is because of the rise of social media. With their rise, there's a false notion out there that social networks like Facebook, Twitter, have made websites obsolete and unnecessary. Well, that's just not true. While sites like Facebook, Twitter, and Google Plus are great platforms, they're not replacements for a solid web presence that you own and control. Because a business's website is its foundation, and all other internet marketing tactics are built out of that foundation. So to continue with the metaphor, if you have a weak foundation, you really compromise the integrity and effectiveness of all your other marketing efforts. And lastly, there are two simple pragmatic reasons to direct your scarce resources to your website. One, it's really easy to make small incremental changes that have a really big impact on your site's effectiveness. Two, the energy you devote to your website pays significant dividends because so few of your competitors are doing anything at all. Most small businesses have dusty, cobweb-filled websites that haven't been updated since the day they were launched. So it's easy to stand out with just a really little bit of effort. Okay, well, that was a pretty long introduction. Thanks for bearing with me. Now let's get into some of the meat of this presentation, the stuff you can do today to make your website better. I've organized these tips into a few different categories. We're going to start with typography and design. So most of you will understand the need for good imagery and graphics and layout. But if we're talking about how to make small changes that produce the biggest impact, typography is probably the best place to start. Because here's the truth, most websites have terrible, and I mean terrible, typography. That's not an exaggeration. Why does typography matter? Well, it matters because it profoundly affects how your prospects interact with your messaging. What's more, because of how people read online in short, fragmented bursts, your typography can determine how much of your message gets through to your audience. So to make sure that your content is as accessible and powerful as possible, you want to make sure it's easy to scan so that people can get a clear idea of what you're communicating in as just a small amount as possible, so in just a brief glance. Here's the thing, as strange as it sounds, by making your copy scannable, you encourage more thorough reading. Seriously, things like headings, subheadings, bulleted lists, and formatted text act as hooks and barbs that draw the eye and channel people's attention into your content. Without these hooks and barbs on your page, your audience is apt to kind of glaze over your text and click away. So another surefire way to boost the impact of your messaging is to make sure it's easier to read. What a concept, right? It's funny that something so simple is so rare on the web. Even great designers overlook this part. To improve the readability of your web page copy, make sure that your font size is no smaller than 14 pixels. Also, make sure you have adequate white space between your lines of text, because if you don't have enough, readers get fatigued and lose focus. Really, they just kind of stop absorbing your messaging. If you're not sure what specs your type should have, you should check out this really cool tool. It's called the Golden Typography Calculator, which will help you find the optimal settings from an aesthetics and readability standpoint for your text. And you can always go to personified.com/typography, and that will also show you some really good examples of what works, what doesn't work, and it's a really good resource to have. And again, here's an image to reinforce the importance of having optimized font sizing and line height, i.e. the white space between lines of text. Okay, more typographic tips. Two important ones. One, don't use more than 2 fonts for your body copy. Any more than 2 and your page starts to look cluttered and fragmented, which will torpedo reader engagement. 2, use common fonts for your website. Although browsers are getting better at rendering fancy typefaces, you never know what kind of browser your customers are using. They're probably using an old and outdated version of Internet Explorer, so you need to choose your fonts with universal accessibility in mind. And one last small but really important typographic tip: don't use underlines to emphasize words. In the language of the web, underlines denote hyperlinks. So don't add underlines to words unless you want users to think that it's a link. If you underline it, they're probably going to click it, and when they can't click it, they get frustrated, and it goes on from there. So, okay, moving on. Now let's take a few minutes to talk about some of the simplest and most important design tips that will have the largest impact in terms of your website's overall effectiveness. Also, don't worry, we're going to start moving a little quicker through these tips so that you can all get back to your busy schedules. Number 1, include your name and logo on every page, and make the logo a link to the home page. This has become standard operating procedure in web design, and that in itself is a good reason to do the same. I'll actually explain why in the next slide. Number 2, use a consistent navigational structure throughout your site. This will improve usability and ensure that visitors can browse your site without getting lost and or frustrated. And here's a good example of a website that follows both of the best practices I just mentioned, having a consistent navigational structure and a logo on every page. Okay, everybody, now this slide is important. As a general rule, it's best to keep your website design close to the standard for your industry. Don't reinvent the wheel. Anything that's on the fringes of what people are used to will backfire. This concept was popularized by usability pioneer Jacob Nielsen. What he said was, users from their expectations for your site based on what's commonly done on most other sites. So if you deviate, your site will be harder to use and users will leave. Now, I'm not saying your website shouldn't be remarkable, but it should be remarkable for its messaging, for its polish, for its usefulness, but not for its novelty. Because on the web, novelty is taxing, and the last thing you want to do is tax your audience. Photography. It's so important. The web is, after all, a visual medium. But you look around and you don't see businesses taking advantage of the huge canvas they're given to showcase their products, services, services in their company. The good news for you then is that even small improvements to the quality of your imagery will dramatically improve the website relative to the competition. To that end, 2 simple tips for improving your imagery. Don't use distorted or grainy photos. And really try to avoid using stock photography whenever you can. The reason, stock photos, which are typically glossy and impersonal, dilute key advantages that small businesses have over large businesses: authenticity and personality. Taking great photos is easier than it's ever been. Seriously, if you have a smartphone, all you need is the free Instagram app and you can really snap tons of cool images in minutes. And actually, here's I think, a really good example of the power of photography. So let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about changes you can make to your site content to make it a more productive contributor to your bottom line. The first tip on this page comes directly from Jacob Nielsen, the usability expert I mentioned earlier. Put your company tagline next to your logo on every page of your site. This simple change can work wonders in terms of clarifying your value proposition, which brings clarity to your visitors on whether or not you can solve their problem. Anytime you can bring clarity to your prospects is a huge win for your website. Secondly, you should definitely have a bold as in direct and persuasive headline on your home page that welcomes visitors and tells them what exactly you sell and how it can help them. It's crazy how many businesses neglect this basic element. If it sounds blindingly obvious and you already have a benefit-focused headline on your homepage, give yourself a pat on the back. You're in a very small and elite group. So earlier we talked about how your typography impacts how people interact with your content. Let's now talk about other ways to improve your messaging and make it easy for prospects to get answers to their questions and understand your pitch. 1, use short, simple, declarative sentences. 2, avoid long paragraphs. People read differently on the web. They're goal-driven, which means they don't have the patience to wade through long paragraphs. So here's a tip for reaching these impatient visitors. When you're writing or editing your content, regularly ask yourself this question: would a 9-year-old understand what I'm talking about? Make sure the answer is yes. This will be challenging. It's all easy to let the words pour out or to throw around industry jargon and fancy puffed up terminology, but simplifying your messaging, boiling it down to the essentials, is the best way to make sure your pitch not only gets through to your audience, but also stays planted in their mind. Now here's another tip that perhaps a few of you will think is too obvious, but I see countless websites that ignore this basic marketing principle. Issue a call to action to your prospects. Fact, no one's getting into your sales funnel unless you show them where it is. And that means making sure your website has prominent and clear calls to action that appeal to your audience's interests. And depending on what you sell, you may need to include calls for varying levels of commitment. For example, if you sell a complex, big-ticket product or service, some of your calls to action might be to download a free report or watch a video or subscribe to a newsletter. And if your products have low price points, you better paint your website with buy now and add to cart buttons. The larger point is this: your visitors should know exactly what they should do when they arrive at your site. And so here's an example of a good call to action. Notice the visual emphasis. The bottom button is almost more prominent than the logo, and the actual call to action is specific and benefit driven. All right, well, moving right along. As I mentioned earlier, your website is the foundation of your larger online presence. It's a great idea to leverage it to drive engagement with other parts of your online portfolio, like your Facebook page and your blog. Secondly, and this one is really important, consider publishing a regular e-newsletter and adding a sign-up form to your website. I could give an entire webinar on the value of newsletters, but for now I'll just quote my favorite usability guy, Jacob Nielsen. If you don't have a newsletter, then publishing one is probably the single highest ROI action you can take to improve your internet presence. So this is another tip to file under the make things easier for your readers category. The inverted pyramid structure is the most efficient way to tell a story when you know your audience may not stick around until the end of it. It means getting to the overall point as quickly as you can, and then, and really only then, adding more detail as you progress. The inverted pyramid structure guarantees that your readers will take away the key points even if they can only read the first 30 words of your copy. And here's another tip that seems minor at first blush, but can really be effective. As I said earlier, small businesses have a huge advantage over their larger competitors. They have character, they have personality. So putting photos of your employees, even if it's just you and your dog, on your About page is a great way to capitalize on this inherent strength. So more on the About page. This is a really important page. It's actually perhaps the most powerful one on your site, so it's a great idea to squeeze as much from it as possible. To that end, be sure to include any calls to action, such as a newsletter opt-in form. All right, so we're on to our last category of improvements, folks. Thanks for your patience. Now, we're going to talk about how to make your site more user-friendly. We'll actually start with the most basic principle. The bedrock principle of usability is this. Give users what they want. Make life easier for them. That means taking the time to identify their goals when they arrive at your site, and then shaping your content accordingly. Part of this effort will be intuitive. Another part might be more quantitative. Maybe you look at your analytics and notice that your contact page is far and away the most visited page on your site, in which case you might consider placing your contact information right on the home page to save visitors some time. Actually, we recommend doing this regardless. Another approach is to conduct some interviews with your prospects and current customers and get their input. The point is, your website will better serve your own goals if you place them second to your visitors' goals. Okay, here's a small tweak that will help your visitors a lot. Make sure you let users know where they've been by using color to distinguish visited links from unvisited ones. This sounds like a small thing, and it is from an execution standpoint, but it's a good idea nonetheless. Okay, so we've already covered this idea, but I want to stress it further. For some reason, people feel like they can only put the contact info on their contact page. But it's my belief that you should make it as easy as possible for prospects and customers to get in touch with you. The most straightforward way to do this is to put your phone number at the top of every page. And here's a personal pet peeve of mine. If you have a crappy search function on your website, get rid of it. There's nothing more frustrating for users who can't find what they're looking for to use a search feature that doesn't deliver any good results. Unless you've embedded Google custom search on your site, the chances are pretty good that your search feature is lacking. I suggest ditching it, especially if your site isn't very big. And here's another tip that I'm sure all of you will understand and agree with. Limit your use of PDFs. User studies have shown that people really don't like toggling back and forth between a normal web page and a PDF document. It breaks their flow and makes them more likely to leave your site. Fortunately, the use of Flash has diminished and businesses are less apt to put annoying animations on their home pages. But there are still some offenders out there. Except in rare cases, Flash will probably just add visual clutter and distraction to your pages. I suggest getting rid of it. Another suggestion, if you operate a brick and mortar type of business, embed a Google map on your contact page. This will make it easy for your visitors to get driving directions to your store. Also, employing some basic SEO tactics will help your site gain prominence in the search results. These are pretty easy to execute, and they go a long way toward improving your ranking in the almighty Google. The first is make sure your unique and accurate meta and title tags for each page on your site are correct. These are the chunks of text that display in the search results, so keep in mind that they have to appeal to humans too and not just algorithms. The second way to get more search engine visibility is to regularly update your site with high-value content that your customers can use. Blogs are very effective in this regard. So here are my parting usability tips. 1, make sure your site loads fast. For one thing, people are impatient and every second counts on the web. Second, your page load time impacts your SEO. So make sure you have a fast loading site. 2, if you run a retail service or a service business that gets a fair amount of mobile traffic, it's a really good idea to create a mobile version of your site so that people who access it via a smartphone or tablet web browser have a good experience and can find what they're looking for. And in the end, that's about it. I hope this has been helpful, and I really appreciate the time you took out of your busy schedule to be here with me today. Please take what you've learned and apply just one thing today or one thing tomorrow, and in no time your website will be a much bigger asset for your business. I guarantee you it will be worth your time. So now what I'd really like to do is open it up to some of the questions we've been seeing in the chat box. I know we've got a couple queued up already. This one is from Jeannie. She says, what content management system do you recommend for small businesses? Well, that's actually a pretty easy one. We would say WordPress. It's an open source publishing platform that's basically become the de facto standard across the web. It's a really incredible and flexible, it's powerful, it's used by tons of Fortune 500 websites, as well as, small mom and pop businesses. I heard a stat recently that 20% of all active websites on the internet are running WordPress. It's awesome. So there's that. And then I got one more here. It says, how much time should I spend on SEO? And this one is actually pretty hard to answer. It's hard on a couple reasons. One, I don't know what your exact unique situation is. I know for some business, those in industries and markets that have high search traffic, SEO can be, a big deal. It can really increase your ROI. And it really can bring people to your websites. For others, though, it might not be the best use of their budget and their resources. It really depends. Probably what I would say, though, is that it makes sense for every business to do, the blocking and tackling of SEO. Really try to get in and see, make sure that you're doing all the little things, making sure that you're, when you title a blog, that it has the information you want in there, the search terms, the keywords, the phrases that you want to have people searching for. Make sure they're early on in the language. Make sure that they're in the title of your blogs. Make sure they're on the title of your posts. There's plenty of easy ways to do good content site management without needing to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to have somebody try to do it for you. You can do a lot of it yourself. What it really does is it just means you have to update your site regularly. Google will find ways to index it, or they just already know how to index it, and it'll really make sure that your site leverages as many of the keywords that you can and that the audience is using to find it. So I know that was kind of a long-winded answer. The end of the day, it really depends on the type of website you have, the type of business you're looking for, and without more information on that, it's just kind of a more general answer, I guess. And unfortunately, because I took so long on that answer, I know we're up against it here. It's about maybe a half hour here, so let me go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you all so much again for joining me. I'd love if you ever need any more tips or if you have any questions to get a hold of us here, and we're always here to help. So please get in touch and take care, and thanks again.